So I'm approaching the end of this year by year review I'm doing of the 2010s decade, and we've got up to 2018. Like I say, a lot of this is just really reciting what's on Wikipedia as well as my own recollection, how I associate certain events with certain years. As of 2013, half the year I was abroad. I was in China for the second half of 2018, so I had less of an intake than I would usually have um, due to access to media websites and so on being more restricted somewhat. Okay, so just going through the year of 2018, this was actually designated the third International Year of the Reef by the International Coral Reef Initiative. So the year 2018, beginning in January, an an extrajudicial killing sparked off protests across Pakistan when a man was killed in Karachi. This was the killing of Nakubullah Masood in a so-called fake encounter staged by the police officer Rao Anwar, and this sparked off protests across a country that is often suffers this problem or often experiences this problem of extrajudicial killings. The Turkish leader Recep Tayyip Erdogan announced the beginning of a military offensive to capture northern Syria from Kurdish forces in an escalation of the Kurdish-Turkish conflict. The United States experienced a government shutdown as a result of a dispute over deferred action for childhood arrivals. Now, 2018 is the year I will associate with. If 2015 was the year where there was a lot of focus on the EU migrant crisis, 2018 was a year where there was a lot of focus on the immigration issue on the American-Mexican border, and there was a whole dispute over the treatment of child immigrants, particularly harrowing images showing them in purported cages. And this led to a very partisan debate over how they were being treated, with the Republicans saying this was no different from what Democratic administrations had done, with Democrats saying that this was inhumane. So this was one of those things that became a very partisan debate. Um, on January the 31st, a total lunar eclipse took place. The moon appeared as a supermoon, with perigee being on January 30th. I don't know what that refers to. It's also the first blue moon eclipse since 1983, and it was referred to as a super blue blood moon. In February, SpaceX successfully conducted its maiden flight of its most powerful rocket to date, the Falcon Heavy, from LC-39A at John F. Kennedy Space Center in Florida. The 2018 Winter Olympics were held in Pyeongchang, South Korea. This was a very significant Winter Olympics because it was the first sort of partnership between the two Koreas, and it was very much seen in that context. One of the most memorable things of those Olympics was the so-called Army of Beauties. This was a group of young women who were kind of seen to making very coordinated appraisals of the dictator Kim Jong Un, and that attracted a lot of attention. And of course, they were under great control over what they could say to the outside media, so that attracted a lot of attention. I thought the Pyeongchang Olympics was one of the best ceremonies I'd ever seen. I thought it was beautiful. I thought it was very well done, not disappointing. So that was the 2018 Winter Olympics. On February the 10th, Kay Goldsworthy became the first female archbishop in the Anglican Communion with her installation in the Anglican Diocese of Perth, Western Australia. The following day, Saratov Airlines Flight 703 crashed shortly after takeoff from Moscow, killing all 71 people on board. This was a reminder of the situation of aviation safety in Russia, which is a country that has long experienced aviation disasters. February the 14th, Jacob Zuma resigned as president of South Africa after 9 years in power, following a number of scandals, including alleged rape. A school shooting occurred in the in the Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School in Parkland, Florida. Although this wasn't the worst mass shooting in American history, it was one that really was almost like the straw that broke the camel's back in terms of outrage. and there was widespread marches across the country led by young people in the March for Our Lives movement, and once again provoked very heated debate with the gun issue in America. I remember seeing the town hall events hosted by CNN where the chairwoman of the NRA and Republican Senator Marco Rubio were, received quite a hostile reception from young people and their families fed up with this gun violence pandemic in the United States. So that was, in some ways, I won't say a turning point because I don't know how much has changed, but certainly was a kind of, one shooting too many sort of situation. On March the 4th, a major international incident took place when two Russian nationals, Yulia and Sergei Skripal, were poisoned in the cathedral city of Salisbury here in the UK. That led to major tensions between Moscow and London, and ultimately resulted in an expulsion of diplomats from the UK and a retaliatory expulsion of British diplomats from Russia. And this very much became, echoes of the Cold War. RT went in overdrive. This is one of those things I'm not going to pretend to be neutral. RT very much pushed Kremlin's propaganda and lies, and this was kind of a reminder of the situation, um, kind of a accumulation of the tensions, if you like, that had been built up over many years, starting with the poisoning of Alexander Litvinenko back in 2006. The agent was a Novichok nerve agent, and this also killed two British citizens. So, although the Skripal survived, this actually left two British citizens dead and began a long standing period of tension between Britain and Russia that hasn't ended yet. Um, On March the 9th, President Donald Trump, accepted an invitation for North Korean leader Kim Jong-un for a meeting in May to discuss the denuclearization of North Korea. This, of course, had come on top of intense tensions that had built on the Korean Peninsula after the testing of missiles and the nuclear tests in 2016. So, this really was a year where there was a lot of focus, I think, on the Korean Peninsula. Later in the year was the Inter-Korean Summit between President Moon of South Korea and Kim Jong-un of North Korea, and this attracted significant media attention because it was the first summit of its kind in some time. So that attracted significant attention. On March the 11th, President Xi Jinping of China approved a constitutional change that removed term limits, granting him basically president for life status. Chinese state media denied this was kind of to put him in power indefinitely, but that's essentially what it was. Um, on March the 12th, some 51 people died in a plane crash in Nepal when flight BS 211 crashed at Tribhuvan International Airport. 20 surviving passengers were seriously injured from the impact and fire. Um, in the Russian presidential election, Putin was elected for a fourth consecutive term, and this made him the longest serving Russian leader since Leonid Brezhnev. And as it stands, he will likely be the longest serving Russian leader since Stalin. This week, in fact, has seen yet more constitutional changes that raise questions of Putin's absolute power within Russia. Needless to say, Putin's United Russia Party got the vast majority of airtime. On March the 19th, the world's last male northern white rhinoceros died in Kenya, making the subspecies functionally extinct. Um, in over 900 cities international, people participate in demonstrations against gun violence and mass shootings, calling for stronger gun control in the March for Our Lives, as previously mentioned. This was focused on the United States, but it was held around the world. Um, on March the 25th, Qantas launched a non-stop flight of the Boeing 787 Dreamliner between Perth Airport in Australia and Heathrow Airport outside London, making it the first commercially non-stop flight between Australia and the United Kingdom. The same day, a devastating fire took place at a shopping complex in the city of Kemerovo in Russia, in which 60 people died. Um, on March the 28th, North Korean Supreme Leader Kim Jong-un met China's paramount leader Xi Jinping, leaving the country for the first time since assuming office in 2011. Um, a major fire took place at police headquarters in Valencia, Venezuela, killing some 78 people, and this was yet another tragedy on top of the humanitarian crisis that was gripping that country. The 2018 Commonwealth Games were held in Gold Coast, Australia. On April the 5th, former Brazilian President Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva was given an arrest warrant after a vote by the Supreme Court voted in favour of denying his habeas corpus due to corruption and other scandals. A truck and bus accident occurred in Canada carrying the Humboldt Broncos ice hockey team in Saskatchewan, leaving 16 people dead. In Syria, a sarin chemical attack took place in the rebel-held town of Douma, killing some 70 people. Later that month, the United States, the United Kingdom, and France ordered the bombing of Syrian military bases in response to the sarin attack by Bashar al-Assad forces, and this, of course, led to uh, an escalation of the media war, with Russian state media attacking Western intervention, Western leaders pointing out the brutality of the Assad regime. Also in April, some 257 people were killed when an Algerian Air Force's jet, an Ilyushin Il-76 model, crashed near Algiers, killing some 257 people. This was the worst ever aviation disaster on Algerian soil. In Nicaragua, protests broke out um, against announced reforms of Social Security, which would decrease retirement pension benefits. Initially, 34 people were killed by police, and in the protests that followed, hundreds would die in this Nicaraguan crisis. Cinemas opened in Saudi Arabia for the first time since 1983, with the American film Black Panther chosen to be the first screening. Miguel Diaz-Canel is sworn in as president of Cuba, marking the first time since 1959 that Cuba has had a president other than the Castro family. Swaziland changed its English name, officially becoming the Kingdom of Eswatini, and I think I'm pronouncing that correctly. In Toronto, Canada, a vehicle ramming attack killed some 10 people, and the 25-year-old suspect Alec Manassian was arrested, and this was his purported reasoning for this was anger at incels. This kind of generated a debate over this sub-community of men who held misogynistic views over their lack of sexual relations. So it led to a sort of social media debate over this phenomenon, and was one of the worst attacks in Canada for some time. The separatist group ETA officially announces its final dissolution after 40 years of armed conflict and more than 800 deaths. So this was one of Europe's longest running armed conflicts came to an end. A major volcanic eruption took place in Hawaii, leading to thousands of residents evacuating. Also that year, there was a major volcanic eruption in Guatemala that left over 100 people dead with the eruption of the volcan de Fuego. In May 2018, the wedding of Prince Harry and Meghan Markle took place in St George's Chapel, England, with a global audience of close to 2 billion. So this was a major royal wedding. Obviously, things have somewhat changed in the last few weeks, but there was major attention on that both within the United Kingdom and around the world, as there was with his older brother in 2011. The Eurovision Song Contest 2018 was held in Lisbon, Portugal, and was won by the Israeli entrant Netta Barzili with the song Toy. NASA's unnamed space probe InSight is launched. It was expected to land on Mars in November and use a drill to conduct geological science. Donald Trump announced his intention to withdraw the United States from the Iranian nuclear agreement. In a statement, former US President Barack Obama called the move a serious mistake. Um, in Malaysia, the Yang de Pertuan Agong, which is the official monarch of Malaysia, Sultan Muhammad V, pardoned Malaysian opposition leader Anwar Ibrahim, who was immediately released. A major aviation disaster occurred in Cuba, with some 112 people killed and only one survivor when Cubana de Aviación Flight 972 crashed after takeoff. Venezuelan presidential election took place, with incumbent Nicolas Maduro re-elected with 67.8% of the vote and the lowest turnout in Venezuelan's modern history since the 1958 coup d'etat. The elections were denounced as a sham by several Latin American countries, the United States, Canada, and the Organization of American States and the European Union. Foreign journalists report that tunnels in the Punggye-ri nuclear test site have been destroyed by the North Korean government in a move to reduce nuclear tensions on the Korean peninsula. A constitutional referendum on whether to repeal the ban on abortion in Ireland took place with a landslide win of 66.4% for the repeal side. And the US trade war with Canada continued with an extension of tariffs on imported steel and aluminium to include the EU, Mexico, and Canada starting at midnight on May 31st. The 44th G7 summit was held in Canada. President Trump pushed for a reinstatement of the G8 to include Russia. This was going against the wishes of the other G7 members. On June the 12th, the North Korea United States summit took place in Singapore, the much reported Singapore summit, and this was the first summit of its kind between a sitting American president and a North Korean leader. Greece and the Republic of Macedonia reached a deal to end a 27-year naming dispute between both countries, which would result in Macedonia officially being renamed the Republic of North Macedonia. FIFA awards the hosting rights for the 2026 World Cup to a joint bid from Canada, Mexico, and the United States. The 2018 FIFA World Cup was held in Russia and was won by France. And amid the ongoing tensions between Russia and the United Kingdom, nevertheless, England fans laid a wreath to commemorate victims of the Battle of Stalingrad, which was then the 75th anniversary of the Battle of Stalingrad. Um, and the United States on June the 19th announced it would withdraw from the United Nations Human Rights Council. Canada became the first major industrialized country to legalize cannabis for for recreational use. Saudi Arabia, in a landmark move, allows women to drive on June 24th. This was after a long-standing campaign. On July the 12th, 12 boys and their football coach are successfully rescued from the flooded Tham Luang Nam Chong cave in Thailand following a 17-day ordeal which gained worldwide attention. And this had many similarities to the Chilean miners' rescue in 2010. It was a human interest story and it attracted worldwide attention. Um, in North America, a heat wave took place, killing some 33 people in the Canadian province of Quebec. Lithuania became the 36th member of the OECD. On July the 9th, Eritrea and Ethiopia officially declared an end to their 20-year conflict. This had begun with a bloody border war in 1998, and this finally accumulated with the ceasefire in 2018. The 2018 Brussels NATO summit was held in Belgium, and on July the 17th, the EU-Japan Economic Partnership Agreement was signed, the world's largest bilateral free trade deal. Scientists report, this is on July the 28th, the presence of a subglacial lake on Mars, 1.5 kilometers below the southern polar ice cap. Massive wildfires in Greece left some 102 people dead. Many tourists were evacuated and caused devastation to the country. More than 100 buildings were destroyed. The share price of Facebook dropped by almost 20% after the company warns investors that user growth has slowed following the data leak scandal. Over 109 billion is wiped from its market value. The longest total solar eclipse of the 21st century occurred, and Mars makes its closest approach to Earth since 2003. The Kivu Ebola outbreak began in 2018 in the Democratic Republic of Congo. Serious floods broke out in the Indian state of Kerala, leaving hundreds dead. NASA launched the unnamed unmanned Parker solar probe to study the sun at close range and the solar wind. A major ferry disaster occurred on Lake Victoria in Tanzania, the MV Nyerere. Some 228 people died. In Genoa, Italy, the part of the Morandi Bridge collapsed after a violent storm, leaving some 43 people dead. The 2018 Asian Games were held in Jakarta and Palembang in Indonesia. Scott Morrison succeeded Malcolm Turnbull as Prime Minister of Australia following the Liberal Party leadership ballot. The Supreme Court of India decriminalises homosexuality in a landmark move. An attack on a military parade killed some 30 people in Afaz, Iran. On September the 28th, a huge earthquake struck Sulawesi in Indonesia, causing a tsunami that killed some 4,340 people and injuring more than 10,000 others in the worst natural disaster of the year. On October the 2nd, the Washington Post journalist Jamal Khashoggi is murdered inside the Saudi consulate in Istanbul, triggering a diplomatic crisis for Saudi Arabia. The United States Senate confirmed Brett Kavanaugh's nomination for the United States Supreme Court by a margin of 50 to 48, making it the closest successful confirmation of a Supreme Court nominee since 1881. The IPCC releases its special report on global warming of 1.5%, warning that rapid, far-reaching and unprecedented changes in all aspects of society are needed to ensure that global warming is kept below 1.5%. Um, on October the 19th, some 59 people are killed when a train ran through a crowd at a Hindu festival in Punjab, India. Once again, another example of India's safety record with railway transport. The unmanned European Japanese spacecraft Bepi Colombo is launched on a 7-year journey to Mercury. Some 700,000 people marched through central London demanding a second referendum on the final Brexit deal. The event is the second most attended protest of the 21st century after the Stop the War rally in 2003 against the Iraq War. So this was a massive demonstration against Brexit and showed just how divided this country was on the Brexit issue. The Hong Kong-Zhuhai Macau Bridge, the world's longest sea crossing bridge, is opened by Chinese President Xi Jinping. Michael D. Higgins is officially declared President of Ireland. Some 11 people were killed in the Pittsburgh synagogue shooting at the Tree of Life synagogue in Pennsylvania in the United States. The far-right leader Jair Bolsonaro is elected as president of Brazil with some 55% of the vote. Lion Air Flight 610 crashed off the coast of Java, killing all 189 people on board. NASA's Kepler mission ends after the aircraft ran out of fuel. NASA's Dawn mission concludes after its run of hydrazine fuel. Campfire wildfires ignited in Butte County, California. This became California's deadliest and most destructive wildfire, with some 88 deaths and almost 19,000 buildings destroyed. Many nations around the world, including those in Europe and the Commonwealth, along with the United States, commemorated the ending of World War I on November the 11th. This was exactly 100 years since World War I, and therefore a very poignant occasion for one of the most devastating conflicts in human history. The Chinese scientist He Jiankui or He Jiankui at a public conference in Hong Kong announced that he has altered the DNA of twin human girls born earlier in the month to try to make them resistant to infection with the HIV virus. He also revealed the possible second pregnancy of another gene-modified baby. France experienced its worst civil unrest since the protests of 1968 due to the Yellow Vest movements against the Macron presidency. These protests in Paris morphed into riots with hundreds of people injured and arrested. And the cause of the Gilets Jaunes protests were a mixture of reasons from higher fuel prices to dissatisfaction with the Macron presidency, and this attracted both the left and right, so it was hard to pigeonhole this movement ideologically. But it was seen very much as much like the Occupy movement at the beginning of the decade, backlash against globalization. At the Katowice Climate Change Conference in Poland, nearly 200 nations agreed to rules on implementing the 2015 Paris Climate Agreement. A tsunami hit the Sunda Strait in Indonesia, killing at least 430 people. The United States experienced a second government shutdown, which arose over a dispute over funding for the US-Mexico border wall. The shutdown, which lasted until January the 25th, 2019, is the longest government shutdown in American history. Burundi moved its capital from Bujumbura to Gitega. After weeks of losses, the Dow Jones Industrial Average posted its largest ever one-day point gain of 1,086 points. And on the last day of the year, the Magnitogorsk building collapse occurred in Russia, with some 39 people killed in that disaster. So that was the year 2018. Um, it's a year I'll remember for, well, certainly the tensions between Britain and Russia, the royal wedding, of course, the ongoing Arab winter crisis, um, but also some more positive news, such as the improved diplomatic relations between Ethiopia and Eritrea. Now, the Academy Awards in 2018, and I'll simply continue this because I've been doing it as an aspect of culture. The Best Picture, this was held at the Dolby Theatre in Los Angeles and for the second time hosted by Jimmy Kimmel. The Best Picture went to The Shape of Water. Best Director went to Guillermo del Toro, who directed The Shape of Water. Best Actor went to Gary Oldman for his portrayal of Winston Churchill in Dark Star, and Best Actress went to Frances McDormand in Three Billboards Out of Ebbing, Missouri. This was, of course, for the films of 2017. Now, the Nobel Peace Prize for 2018 was held jointly between two people, Denis Mukwege, who is a Congolese gynecologist, and Nadia Murad, who's an Iraqi Yazidi human rights activist. And this was awarded to these two individuals for their tireless efforts in combating sexual violence. Nadia Murad had, in fact, been a prisoner of ISIS and a sex slave of ISIS. She showed profound courage in her tireless work in helping victims of sexual slavery. Denis Mukwege, likewise, in a region of the world which has long suffered from this problem. So they were jointly awarded the Nobel Peace Prize for the year 2018. And finally, Time Magazine Person of the Year, I believe, went to reporters, but officially this was in recognition of Jamal Khashoggi, among other reporters who risked their lives to report frontline news. Um, this went to, get this precisely, The Guardians, as Time magazine put it. This was journalists who faced persecution, arrest, and murder for the reporting. Those highlighted on four different covers included Jamal Khashoggi, Maria Reza, editor of the Philippines news magazine Rappler, who was indicted for her critical coverage of President Duterte's controversial drug war. Walon and Kya So-u, Reuters journalists captured in Myanmar whilst investigating the massacre of Rohingya Muslims, and their staff of the capital, a Maryland newspaper whose office was targeted by a gunman who killed five of its employees in a mass shooting. So that was the year 2018. Now this is my longest video to date. I'll try and tone it down a bit for 2019, but that was also an eventful year. So that's the year 2018, my review. Let me know if you want to add anything to that.